7. The Mosin-Nagant M91/30, Soviet Union, bolt-action rifle. This gun killed more human beings than most people will ever be able to comprehend. The Soviets produced over 17 million of these rifles, and on the Eastern Front, the bloodiest theater of the entire war, almost every one of them was pointed at a German soldier. Here's what made this rifle terrifying. It was simple. Brutally, stupidly simple. You could dig it out of the snow, wipe it on your coat, and it would fire. German soldiers described encountering waves, actual waves of Soviet infantry, each one carrying this rifle, advancing through smoke and bodies and artillery craters. You'd kill one, another stepped over him. You'd kill that one, another came. The psychological impact was unlike anything else in the war. German soldiers called the Eastern Front the War of the Mosin, because no matter how many you shot, there was always another one coming, carrying that same long barrel with that same spike bayonet fixed on the end. And then there were the snipers. Vasily Zaitsev, 225 confirmed kills using this exact rifle. Ludmila Pavlichenko, called Lady Death by the Nazis, 309 confirmed kills. Both used the Mosin-Nagant. Estimated kills across the war, over 2 million. The Germans feared it not because it was advanced. They feared it because it was everywhere, and it never stopped coming. 6. The Lee-Enfield. Number 4. British Empire. If there's one rifle that literally held the British Empire together during its darkest hours, it's this one. From Dunkirk to El Alamein to the jungles of Burma, this gun was in every British soldier's hands. And it had one feature that set it apart from every other bolt-action rifle in the entire war: its rate of fire. A trained British soldier could fire 20 to 30 aimed rounds per minute with a Lee-Enfield. 20 to 30. That's not a typo. German soldiers on the receiving end of a British infantry line consistently reported in their journals that they believed they were being attacked by machine guns, when it was just 2 or 3 soldiers with Lee-Enfields. This technique even had a name: the Mad Minute. British soldiers trained obsessively to fire as fast as humanly possible with a bolt-action weapon, and they got terrifyingly good at it. At the Battle of Mons in World War I, the Germans literally stopped their attack because they were convinced the British had hidden machine guns. They hadn't. It was just Lee-Enfields and well-trained hands. And in World War II, that same doctrine continued. The Lee-Enfield served in every single major British campaign. From the freezing winters of Italy to the suffocating heat of the Pacific, it never let a soldier down. Estimated kills: over 1.5 million across both world wars, with a significant portion coming from World War II's global conflicts. Enemies didn't just fear British firepower, they feared British accuracy. And this rifle is why. 5. The M1 Garand, United States. General George Patton called it, quote, "the greatest battle implement ever devised." That's not marketing. That's a general who'd watched men die telling you exactly what he thought. Here's the thing about the M1 Garand that no one talks about enough. In 1944, when American soldiers were storming beaches and pushing through hedgerows in Normandy, their standard rifle was semi-automatic. The Germans opposing them were mostly using bolt-action rifles. Think about what that means. An American GI could fire 8 rounds as fast as he could pull the trigger. The German in the trench across from him had to manually cycle his bolt between every single shot. In a firefight measured in seconds, the American had a massive, brutal advantage. German soldiers absolutely knew this. After the war, Wehrmacht veterans spoke repeatedly about the shock of encountering American infantry. The sheer volume of aimed fire that came at them was unlike anything they'd faced. One German account describes an ambush on an American patrol that went catastrophically wrong because the Americans, even while being surprised, could put out so much fire so quickly that the ambushing Germans were overwhelmed. The Garand also made the average American soldier more confident. You had 8 rounds in a semi-auto platform. You were not afraid to shoot. And that psychological edge, that willingness to engage, translated directly into combat effectiveness. Over 5.4 million M1 Garands were produced. They were everywhere American boots touched ground. Estimated kills: over 1 million in World War II alone, with many historians placing it significantly higher. The Garand didn't just win firefights, it won wars.
4. The Karabiner 98K, Nazi Germany. For most of World War II, this was the backbone of the most feared military machine in the world. The Wehrmacht, the German army, marched across Europe with this rifle. Poland fell to it. France fell to it. It pushed into Russia with it. And even as Germany began to collapse, this rifle was in the hands of every German infantryman, fighting to the last. The 98K was a masterpiece of engineering. 5-round internal magazine. Bolts so smooth you could cycle it in the dark, in the cold, with shaking hands. accurate to over 500 meters in the hands of an average soldier, and lethal well beyond that in the hands of a sniper. And Germany produced snipers like no other nation on Earth. Matthias Hetzenauer, 345 confirmed kills. Sepp Allerberger, 257 confirmed kills. Both using the 98K, both operating on the Eastern Front, where a single sniper could paralyze an entire Soviet advance for days. Soviet soldiers were terrified of German snipers. Moving between positions meant death. Raising your head above a trench meant death. Simply being visible meant death. And it was almost always a 98,000 round that ended things. The rifle was so respected that captured 98Ks were prized by Allied and Soviet soldiers alike. Enemies kept the guns they took off dead Germans. That tells you everything. Over 14 million produced, used on every front of the entire war. Estimated kills, well over 2 million. Some historians place it as the single highest kill count rifle of the war. Germany lost the war, but the 98,000 never stopped being dangerous until the last bullet was fired. 3. The MG42, Nazi Germany, machine gun. Stop. Before we go any further, this weapon has a nickname. Allied soldiers called it Hitler's buzzsaw. The Germans called it the bone saw. The sound it made, a tearing, screaming, mechanical shriek, was so distinctive, so horrifying, that Allied High Command actually produced training recordings of it so soldiers could learn to identify it before they ever went into combat. Because the moment you heard that sound, you needed to be on the ground. Immediately. The MG42 fired 1,200 to 1,500 rounds per minute. To put that in perspective, most machine guns of that era fired 400 to 600 rounds per minute. The MG42 fired so fast that individual shots were indistinguishable. It wasn't a series of bangs. It sounded like a single extended rip. Allied soldiers described the psychological effect as almost paralyzing. Veterans of Normandy spoke about the MG42 decades later with visible emotion.
We were upstairs in a building, and they were down in a field where there were fruit trees. Very shortly, they were firing at us through the window, and we were firing back at them. And our platoon lieutenant was a big man, and he told one of us to go down and get the 50 caliber machine gun off the Jeep that we had. And here he was with a 50 caliber machine gun firing by hand at the Germans firing at us, you see. So anyway, that pretty well stopped them, but not until their machine guns were MG42s, and they fired about 1,500 rounds a minute, as opposed to our machine guns, which only had about 500 rounds per minute. And pretty soon in came a streak of these MG42 bullets right through the window, across the ceiling, and that rather scared me.
Men who'd survived brutal combat, who'd seen things that would break most people, and they still got quiet when they talked about that sound. A single MG42 crew, 2 men, could pin down an entire company of infantry. Entire advances stopped. Entire flanking movements collapsed. Because one gun behind a good position with enough ammunition was essentially uncountable death. The Americans were so shaken by it that they redesigned their own machine gun doctrine after encountering it. The Germans had built something that changed how war was fought. Estimated kills in World War II, over 3 million. 3 million. The MG42 was so effective that a direct descendant of it, the MG3, is still in use by militaries around the world today. That's how good this weapon was. The war ended 80 years ago, and militaries still won't let go of the design. It wasn't just a gun, it was a force of nature wrapped in stamped steel. 2. The ppsh-41, Soviet Union, submachine gun. If the MG42 was the sound Allied soldiers feared, the ppsh-41 was the sound German soldiers on the Eastern Front had nightmares about. 71-round drum magazine, 900 rounds per minute, a range of 200 meters. Simple enough to be produced by furniture factories, cheap enough that the Soviets made over 6 million of them. 6 million. The Soviet Union handed these out to entire units, not just individual soldiers, entire squads where every man carried one. German soldiers called it the ppsh, Russian slang for daddy. There's something deeply unsettling about an enemy weapon getting a nickname. It means it got into their heads. At Stalingrad, arguably the most brutal urban battle in human history, the ppsh-41 was the defining weapon. Soviet soldiers clearing buildings, fighting room to room, fighting on staircases and through holes blown in walls. The ppsh's high rate of fire and giant magazine made it the perfect instrument of that kind of violence. German soldiers described the sound of multiple ppsh-41s firing simultaneously as a physical sensation. The sheer volume of lead coming through a doorway or window was something bolt-action rifles simply couldn't answer. German infantry trained for open-field engagement found themselves in rubble mazes, being outgunned at every turn. Captured ppsh-41s were used by German soldiers who managed to get their hands on them. They even retooled some of them to accept German 9mm ammunition because they didn't want to give them up. Think about that. German soldiers, equipped by the most sophisticated military-industrial complex in the world, preferred a Soviet weapon stamped out in furniture factories. Estimated kills, over 3.5 million. The ppsh-41 didn't just fight Germany, it helped bury it. And then there's number one. The number one killing instrument of World War II, the weapon responsible for the most human deaths, was artillery. Specifically, the guns of the artillery corps on all sides. 105mm howitzers, 155mm field guns, Soviet Katyusha rocket batteries. Approximately 60% of all combat deaths in World War II were caused by artillery and air bombardment. Not rifles, not machine guns, shells. But if we're talking about a single specific artillery weapon carried, crewed, and operated at the ground level, a weapon that soldiers physically feared more than almost anything else, then number one is the German 88mm flak gun, the Oct-Oct. Originally designed as an anti-aircraft gun, German commanders in North Africa discovered something extraordinary. It could destroy any Allied tank on the battlefield with ease. At ranges where Allied tanks couldn't even shoot back effectively. British tank crews called it the 88 and spoke about it the way people speak about something they couldn't fully explain. You'd be buttoned up inside 50 tons of steel, and the 88 would punch right through. The round traveled so fast there was almost no warning. One moment your tank was intact, the next, it wasn't. German commanders like Rommel used the 88 as a trap, drawing Allied tanks forward into seemingly favorable ground, then letting the hidden 88s tear them apart from positions the Allies couldn't see. Allied tank crews in Normandy described specific behaviors, looking for the telltale muzzle flash of an 88, listening for the distinctive crack of the round, planning entire route advances around avoiding known 88 positions. The Germans produced around 21,000 of the 88mm guns across the war. They were used against aircraft, tanks, infantry, fortifications, and ships. Estimated kills, uncountable. Conservative estimates put direct combat deaths from 88mm fire in the millions. Soldiers on every Allied front talked about the 88 with something that went beyond respect. It was dread. Pure, cold dread.